1961, a theater somewhere on the Southern touring circuit. B.B. King was already off stage, jacket off, done for the night, when the opening notes of "At Last" came through the curtain and stopped him where he stood. He had been heading toward the back of the building, toward the loading dock and the car, and the particular exhaustion that follows a full set. He had played well that night, the way he almost always played well, with the easy authority of someone who has spent so many years inside the blues that the music and the man have become difficult to separate. The crowd had received him the way crowds always received him, gratefully, hungrily, the way people receive something they recognize as real. He was done, and then the curtain moved, and the band on the other side began to play, and B.B. King stopped walking. The opening of "At Last" is not a dramatic thing. It doesn't announce itself the way some songs do, with a brass section or a drum fill or a tempo that tells the room something is about to happen. It arrives quietly, on a handful of notes from a string arrangement, unhurried and almost tentative, like something approaching from a distance that hasn't decided yet whether it intends to arrive. Most audiences, by 1961, recognized it immediately. It had been Etta James's song for 2 years by then, and it had already become the kind of recording that people carried with them without quite knowing why. B.B. King recognized it too, but what stopped him in that backstage corridor wasn't the song itself. It was what he heard in the first few bars before Etta's voice came in, a quality in the way the band was playing it, a particular weight in the tempo that told him something about how the singer behind the curtain was intending to approach it that night. To understand what B.B. King heard, it helps to understand what kind of listener he was. By 1961, B.B. King had been playing the blues for nearly 15 years on circuits exactly like this one. Small theaters, church halls converted for the night, clubs that held 300 people if they stood close together. He had learned to play in rooms where the audience was not patient, where the music had to earn its space in the air every single night, where a performer who was going through the motions could feel the room beginning to drift within the first verse. He had learned, through all of that, to hear the difference between a musician who was performing a song and one who was inside it. And the difference was not always obvious to a general audience, but to B.B. King, who had spent his entire adult life listening for it, it was as clear as the difference between light and the absence of light. He had heard Etta James before. He knew her as a singer with a voice that was difficult to categorize, too large for the pop world, too slick for the deep blues, too emotionally raw for easy radio, too controlled for the chaos that some people expected from her. She occupied a space that didn't have a clean name, somewhere between gospel and soul and blues, and something that was still being invented as she went. He respected her. He had told people as much, in the way musicians tell each other things, briefly, without ceremony, in the hallways of venues exactly like this one. But respect and what he felt standing in the wings that night were different things. Etta's relationship with "At Last" by 1961 was complicated in ways that audiences rarely considered. The song had given her something she had never quite had before, a calling card, a piece of music that people associated with her name before they associated anything else. It had opened doors. It had made her recognizable in rooms where she had previously been another name on a bill. And it had also become, over 2 years of touring, a kind of obligation. The song the audience always wanted. The song she was always expected to deliver. The thing the evening was building toward whether she wanted it to or not. What this meant in practice was that At Last was both her greatest gift and her most demanding performance. Every audience that had heard the recording came to a show with the version they already knew living inside them. The Chess Records arrangement, the specific weight of Etta's voice on that particular day in that particular studio. They brought it with them into the theater and held it up silently against whatever she gave them from the stage. To match the recording was not enough. The recording was finished, unchangeable, perfect in its way. What the live version had to do was something the recording could not. It had to be alive. On most nights, Etta delivered this. She was a professional, and she understood the obligation, and she was capable of giving an audience what the song required, even on the nights when she was tired or distant or somewhere else inside herself. The shell could carry At Last when the rest of her couldn't. But some nights were different. Some nights, for reasons that could not always be predicted or explained, the distance between Etta and the song closed entirely. The shell wasn't gone. It never entirely left, because the shell was part of what made the performance sustainable. But on those nights, it became thin enough that what was behind it came through. And what was behind it on those nights was something that had very little to do with the conventional reading of At Last as a love song about happiness finally arriving. What was behind it was the blues. Not the blues as a genre, not the blues as a set of chord changes and lyrical conventions, but the blues as a way of understanding what longing actually costs. The blues that knows that when something good finally arrives, the wait for it doesn't disappear. It becomes part of the good thing itself, lives inside it, gives it the weight that makes it worth having. The At Last in the song, on those nights, wasn't just relief. It was relief that had passed through years of its opposite, and the years were still audible in the voice that sang it. That was what B.B. King heard, standing in the wings. He heard the song the way he would have played it, not as a love story with a happy ending, but as a document of everything that had to happen before the ending was possible. He heard the years in Etta's voice, the specific quality of someone who has waited for something for a long time and knows, now that it has arrived, that the waiting will always be part of what it means. He heard the blues in a song that most people received as something lighter than that, and it stopped him the way very few things stopped him, because it told him something about Etta James that he had sensed but had not, until that moment, fully understood. She was not a soul singer who could do the blues. She was a blues singer who had found a way to make the blues inhabit whatever room she walked into, regardless of what the song was called or how it was classified. At Last was not, in Etta James's hands, a departure from the blues. It was the blues, wearing different clothes, in a different light, in a theater where people had come for something else and were getting something more than they knew. B.B. King stood in the wings for the entire song. He didn't move toward the back of the building, didn't check on his band or his equipment or his car. He stood where he was and listened, with the particular attention of someone who has spent a long time learning to hear what most people miss. When the song ended, the audience gave Etta what audiences always gave her after At Last: the recognition of something beautiful, the applause of people who have been moved and know it, even if they can't say exactly why. It was generous and genuine. It was also, B.B. King understood, slightly less than what she had actually given them. He waited until she came off stage. He didn't say much. He was not a man who spoke at length about music when silence could serve the same purpose. What he said to Etta in the narrow space between the curtain and the corridor, amounted to an acknowledgment, a few words that told her he had been standing there and that he had heard what the performance actually was underneath the song that everyone already knew. Etta received this the way she received most things from people she respected, not with visible relief, not with the gratitude of someone who had needed to hear it, but with the quiet recognition of someone who had known what she'd given and was glad, simply, that someone else had known too. There are performances like that in every long career, not the ones that make the most noise, not the ones recorded and released and played on the radio, but the ones that happen fully and completely in a single room on a single night, and are received, perhaps, by one or two people who have the ears to know what they're hearing. They don't repeat. The conditions that made them possible, the particular tiredness of a singer at a certain point in her life, the particular weight in the strings that night, the particular way the audience sat and waited, those conditions never exactly align again. B.B. King carried that night in the way musicians carry the performances that tell them something true about the art they've given their lives to. Not as a story he told often, not as an anecdote about Etta James's talent, but as a reference point for something he already believed and had now heard confirmed, that the blues was not a category. It was a way of being inside a song. And Etta James, on that night, had been as deep inside it as anyone he had ever stood in a wing and listened to. The curtain came down. The theater began to empty. Somewhere on the southern touring circuit, in a building that probably no longer exists, a night ended the way most nights ended, quietly, without ceremony, the musicians collecting themselves and moving on toward wherever came next. But the song had been there, and B.B. King had heard it. That, in the end, was enough.